Hello, and welcome to Not Safe for Racists, a podcast designed to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, candidly and without judgment. Our goal is to have open and honest conversations about current issues and how we can work together to improve our social, learning, and work environments. My name is Janella Bella, Principal Consultant at Diverse Solutions Strategy Firm, and your host. I've been doing this assignment with my students, and I've been doing it over the last 4 weeks now, where they're writing their own autobiographies. So at the beginning of every class, we watch an autobiography, and then they start doing a part of theirs. And it was over the month of January. And so yesterday, my students started presenting them, and not a word of a lie, I started crying. I didn't realize the lives that these kids have. And I know there's a term for it. It just blew my mind. And I know that you have experience with your own children's story not being told correctly. And so I had to just have this chat with you.
Cool.
So I guess what I wanted, I was thinking about teaching in general, and I was thinking about the way we interact with people. And I don't know if there's a way that we can openly have these discussions, or why we don't have these discussions about other people's stories normally. This isn't something that you just talk to someone about.
I have so much to say about this. I think there's a danger in making assumptions about literally anyone based on literally anything.
Wait, what's that 90s song where it's you didn't, I'm gonna have to find it. There's a song that goes with that where it's you can't make assumptions based on who they are.
Yes, and it's very what's his name? David Bowie, I guess he did that. You don't know how it feels to be me. I think when you start to contextualize DEI and social justice and the ideas of story, that somewhere in all of that, maybe we forgot that each other is people. Every single human has a story. And it could be that your family faced tragedy and came through it, or that your family does not have the economic background that you think that it does, or maybe your family has a criminal record or 6 or 12 on your family tree branches, or maybe you're more diverse than you look and you're not allowed to identify as such, or maybe you're a passer. How many people are that? I was thinking about this morning. Do you remember when we were at that the conference that we met at, the International Society for the Social Studies, and we were in that one session, and they were talking about Henry Ford and how he had that giant factory in Alabama, and how all those people that had immigrated to Alabama from all over the world, right?
And he had this school.
Yes, and it was to make you American, right?
Yeah.
So back then, it was all about you conforming to this cultural hegemony. That's what we would say today, right? But back then, it was you want to be accepted because you don't want to be an outsider. So whatever you can do to pass in whatever context that means, you wanted to do it. I mean, even in the Victorian era, dadgummit, my little robo vacuumer is driving me nuts. I'm gonna go turn him off real quick. I'll be right back. Hold on. We have to be authentic, right? We're being authentic. Hold on.
I'll splice this section out. I saw him go by and I almost died.
Okay, and we're back. So I think that there are a couple of factors that kind of flood into our everyday lives when we think about and talk about stories. And I think one of them is the Victorian era that we never really got over. And the other one is, well, let's talk about the Victorian era first, and then we can talk about the Cold War. But in the Victorian era, there was this whole transition between are you super rich or super poor, right? Because there wasn't a huge middle class. So you were either butt poor, and by that I mean you had no money. There was no leisure time. If you read texts about what people did across the board, I'm talking in North or South America, I'm talking about in Europe, I'm talking about maybe not so much in Afro-Eurasia, well, in the corner of Europe that I'm thinking about, but you're talking about Europe or North America or South America. During the Victorian era, if you were poor, your life was very limited, but you had to appear as though you were rich, and it had to seem effortless, right? So
Yeah.
like on Sundays, people went to church because it was
And
free
mm-hmm.
and it was entertainment. By entertainment quotes, I mean like it was community. I don't mean they were irreverent. I don't mean that they didn't have whatever spiritual whatever. I'm just saying that was what you did because that was where you found community. The rest of your time was spent, maybe in a factory or as a maid or whatever it is that you did. If you were super rich, I mean, that's outside of my understanding because I have no context to understand. Like my husband yesterday, Phil told me, he goes, did you know that the 10 most wealthy people in the world have like tripled their money during the pandemic? And that is outside my context. Like I can't quantify that.
No,
But
my students and I are talking about Jeff Bezos right now,
right.
and it's just insane that they can't physically quantify. And we actually look at the numbers, the difference between like millions and billions, and it's so incomprehensible that that amount of money is attached to a single body.
It doesn't make any sense. It's like that movie Paperclips. They made this movie Paperclips to help these kids that lived out in the country learn about what numbers of people died in the Holocaust. So the teacher was like, oh, we can do paperclips. I don't know if you ever watched it. It's super powerful and I mean, really impactful and amazing. But so when I start thinking about what influences our life today, I think we're still influenced by that need to appear effortless. It needs to appear like everybody's super rich and that it's effortless. That's crap, number one. Number
That's the
two,
lie about capitalism, right? They make you think you can get it, but then you can never get it, but you're just feeding into those who are on the top of the hierarchy.
that's exactly right. And I think too that when you start to look at capitalist theory and communist theory, capitalist theorists will tell you that eventually it will descend, it will like cannibalize itself and descend into communism. And communist theorists will tell you that eventually communism will just like cannibalize itself and descend into capitalism, so that they're both like two sides of the same ribbon that you're looking at, which is, dangerous to say or think or do maybe, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's something that needs to be said. I don't know. I don't make the news, I just report it, right? That's just kind of what I do. So, on the other hand, there's another thing that I think feeds into our stories that we say or that we feel brave enough to share, and that is the Cold War. The Cold War is still a huge factor in that need for like homogeny. I don't want to be an outsider because I don't want you to think I'm a Russian spy. And legit, that is a real, I mean, tangible fear. I have a student that I'm thinking about right now. It's hard to be like, seek or to keep things it's hard to keep things neutral when I talk about this student because I love all my students. But this one particular student is a Finnish Canadian immigrant to here. So she was born in Finland, moved to Canada, moved to the States. Okay. Love this child. I love all my children, but this one in particular, she just like gets to me and she'll tell me things. I still know her. She's in college now, knew her in high school. She'll still tell me now how they would tell stories in the village or city or whatever you want to call it. She was from in Finland about, you better be good or the Russians are going to come get you. You go out in the forest, but you don't go to like this place because that's where the Russians come. And it's funny, the boogeyman stories that we tell, and there's complexity in literally everything. I mean, the way that you look at and approach any story. I mean, even of the people that are famous, like I'm working on a project right now, and I was looking at people that I could, use for students to, hey, if you need to look up somebody, here's an example, whatever. And the people that I was looking up were like rich businessmen and businesswomen. One of them is this dude who's from Ireland, but he lives in Pakistan, but his family is actually Saudi. Like, I think those stories are more real than whatever the pretend is that we keep going with.
And
And
then as we start to authenticate those stories and the stories that are not traditional, I think that that's what's going to change the perception that we have towards our own representation and how we present ourselves to other people. but also the way that we navigate teaching and learning, because that has so much to do with how we perceive what we're supposed to be teaching, or how
Mhm.
we're supposed to be teaching, and who we're teaching to. And so candidly, these students were having discussions about these traumas in their life, which I was unaware of. And what shocked me the most is the whole time I'm watching them, I'm letting them share, share, share. And then in my head, I'm thinking how deeply traumatic this must be and how the other students are going to respond. And then when they did respond, the students were not responding to the actual content at all. They're like, wow, your life was so interesting, or you did that, that was cool, or you went there and did that. And none of the content that they were addressing was these mutual traumatic experiences, because that was normal to them. That's normal to their story. And so it kind of checked me and my privilege as an educator. I'm like, "Oh, I'm unaware of this, and it concerns me thinking that this isn't a normal story, but for them it is."
I think that's part of, but that's evidence of what an amazing educator you are, because your students felt comfortable enough to share that with you.
Is this where I
I will
insert like the toot toot, the tooting my own horn sound?
It's just, I'm just being honest, like, I feel as though perhaps when we allow our students to feel safe and to start exploring, and I hate to be a nerd, but that's just who I am, you know me. And you have people like Vygotsky and Frere talking about the importance of dialogues and building classroom communities, right? And when I reflect on that and I start to think back on my own intellectual families that I've had throughout the a million years that I've been teaching, and I think about students that literally came out of the closet to me or were comfortable expressing how they were going through transitions with gender, or students who sat next to each other and had different last names but had the same father and came to me and told me about that one day, and it was like, cool, okay, and like, let's talk about what that looks like for you. I think that the floodgates have been opened about telling each other's story. And I think the exciting thing about acknowledging that each other has a story and that there is more to literally everyone you see anywhere in any interaction, period, forever, is that we all have agency. And I don't know how you can represent, like, I feel like I'm on the verge of tears almost because this is amazing. I don't know how you can really give representation or voice to the infinite variables that we as humans face and the infinite complexity of our intersectionality.
Though, I think that it's not about giving voice to the variables. I think it's just having that open mindedness to all voices that offers that platform for the different variables. Because if we keep trying to navigate, okay, here's a voice for race, here's a voice for sexuality, here's a voice for this, here's a voice for disability, mental health, blah, 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 we're going to overwhelm ourselves with diversity. And it's not about, I don't think, acknowledging individual diversities. I think it is acknowledging that the vastness of intersectionality and opening our mindset to letting people be diverse in their own light. And I think that platform itself creates that opportunity. And now I'm not one to typically quote pop culture here. I don't even, but I was talking to my students about this today, and I don't know if you know who Jojo Siwa is.
Of course I do. My boys, they know
So
JoJo Siwa. They love her. She just came out.
well, so that's the thing. She just came out,
Mhm.
and what was really shocking to me was that she came out in a way that not a lot of people like. She didn't openly come out. She came out with like a video where she was singing Lady Gaga, and she was kind of just singing on. There's no caption, no like coming out. And then she kind of came up with a follow-up video a couple days later where it was talking about how coming out doesn't have to be scary anymore. It's not a fearful moment. It's something that people are excited to do and excited to be a part of and recognize that uniqueness. And as she explained that, I was just like in the background, like, yes, yes, yes. Finally, someone's using a platform. Not finally, there are tons of other celebrities doing that, but
Mhm.
it's another opportunity for young people to see that this is that uniqueness and difference is okay. And it does open up that story and that platform for people to share that story that they have.
I totally agree. I think it's important. I think what you're saying and what I'm saying in a different way, because we say things in our own special rainbow, right? But I think what you're saying and what I'm saying are that everybody needs to have somebody out there that they're able to see. Everybody needs to feel safe. Because if we don't feel safe and you see somebody that's out there and they're doing what you're doing, but you see that they're being berated and ripped apart and all of this, and it seems like what they did after they put themselves out there was negative, like there was a negative impact on that person, that person's family, that person's life, their job, whatever, then that's not what we need. What we need is you come out and you're like, I just want to let everybody know that fill in the blank. And if you do that on your own terms, that it's celebrated and acknowledged, like what your students did. They weren't like, holy crap, you did blah, 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 and this is really scary. And I can't believe that you lived through that. And that's insane. I mean, they didn't say that. They were just like, man, that's really cool that you made it through.
Yeah.
What a testament, right? To the kids
And
today.
that's what we're seeing in that change in young people, is that they have that exposure. And I think that that exposure creates a lot of fear for people, because I am talking to 13, 14-year-old kids who
Mhm.
we see as kids, but they're full grown human beings. They have
Right,
experienced things, they understand things, what they
right,
see on the internet, and especially with apps like TikTok now, where they're living in a different person's life every 60 seconds, and they can
right.
fully acknowledge that IRL. There's IRL streaming on Twitch, there's IRL streaming on YouTube, and we're starting to see all of these moments where students and young people are exposing themselves to content so far beyond our grasp that they have this new concept of reality, new concept of who they are and how they can be. And I think it's kind of taking the older generations like a second to catch up to that.
So, okay, I hate to be weird, but I just am going to be weird for a minute. But I wonder if that's not a Western thing. Like I said, with the whole like resonance of the Victorian era, because prior to the Victorian era, this idea of a childhood wasn't a thing. Like there was no such thing as like, let's have a super enchanting childhood and Santa Claus and Christmas trees and blah, blah, blah. That wasn't a thing. It was not a thing. That's not to say that children didn't go ice skating or play soccer, because obviously they did. I mean, we literally have like historical texts talking about it. We know they had toys, whatever, but there was no like little cotton ball around it. But the impact of actually middle class women seeing children having these horrid lives and being just abused and used and killed and awfully just horrible situations I'm trying to get out of my mind because I can't stop seeing them in factories where they were working was what kind of led to this revolution that in many ways ironically led to us having public schooling as a requirement. So if we hadn't had, sorry, that's one of my little ones right now. Yes, your GT is in 10 minutes. I'm talking to Miss Janelle. I love you. Go to school. Babe, I'll see what I can do. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I think that that's also changed and evolved the way that we saw childhood in the West. But I don't know that much of that changed for people in other parts of the world.
No, I think that if you look at like a comparison of schools, and when we start to look at like the difference of childhood or of schooling in different countries, you start to see truly how culture affects the views on on story. And that does go back to the root of Eurocentrism in the West and how that has kind of carried across. Because you look at schools in Northern Europe, you look at schools in Asia or South Asia or in South America, and you start to see the differences between how children are viewed, how they're viewed within the home, how they're viewed within society, and how their stories are not just that enchanted magical place that you described. And I think that as we globalize and as people start to move around, we're going to move away from that Eurocentric view and away from that structure that has sustained that kind of oppressiveness on the individual story.
The whole ageism thing is an issue. I mean, you've spoken with both of my sons. They know you, obviously, if I'm like, hey, it's Mr. Phone. They and you've had some pretty complex conversations with them. I mean, even I've known you for years and you've known them since they were tiny. I mean, the difference between knowing them when they were 6 and now when they're 10 is different. I don't know. How long have I known? It doesn't matter. Math is weird. Bottom line, if you have places like if we were to just spin the globe and land, and let's say we go to Ghana, right? What would the average age of a male be based on the strife and political tension that they have in the area? I know I was watching the World Cup not too long ago, just a couple of years ago, and they were like, so like 23% of the Ghana's population of men is on the field right now because of all of these, this political strife that they've been experiencing. And in those communities, boys and teenagers who for us were like, oh, boys and teenagers, and we have this idea in our mind, this Western perception. But if we were to spin the globe and point, for example, to Ghana, which is where I'm kind of talking about right now, what would that be? What would you be if you were there? What would I be if I was there? What would I be if I was in Turkmenistan, as a 39-year-old? What would that look like? What would my life look like? What would my life look like as a mother for my boys? What would my life look like as a working mother? It's impossible, I think, for us to grab what the internet has provided for those populations. And I think too that we need to be careful with the idea of ageism, because I hear a lot, and I'm sure you hear this too, where people are concerned with online learning. They're like, oh, kids are getting so behind. This is just not working. And you know what? It's not. It sucks. But I hate to be obvious, but there's a pandemic happening. So when people are like, oh, the kids are stressed out, they miss out on this stuff, I get really frustrated because I'm like, yeah, they're frustrated. Yeah, they're missing out. There's a pandemic, They're used to being able to do things like, I feel like going to the birthday party, or I want to go scootering, or I want to go around the neighborhood or whatever. And now it's like, well, do you have a mask? Are you maintaining 6 feet distance? No, we're not taking our mask off when we're in public. And it's like all of a sudden this reality that they have has changed. So I think that our kids today are starting to really get into that. You remember a couple years ago when everybody's like, oh, grit, we need grit. And we just talked about it, but nobody really did anything to help people to achieve or experience what that meant.
Yeah.
This is that action happening. This is grit in reality. And our children are connecting with each other, and they're having a voice, and they have ideas about big issues. And I think that we should listen.
And I think too that it has to do with that idea of normal. And we are expecting to have this sense of normal when it comes to online learning. And it's not. When I'm staring at a screen of 30 blank people and
Right.
I am talking to myself for 2.5 hours at a time, it's not the same as getting that body language from my students or having that face-to-face interaction. And
Right.
so on top of all of the stuff going on with the pandemic, which not just students are facing, the parents are facing, they've got
Yes.
systems at home. There's so much
Yes.
more to it that we're not really giving a clear head to realizing that normal is not possible at this time. There's absolutely no way that I can expect my student who's going to be at home using their mom's phone while she's on the laptop and they've got a younger kid and no one's making them lunch because the parents are working. It's just none of that is in consideration. And that goes right back to that story where we aren't focusing on those differences and acknowledging and appreciating them during this time. We're just saying, okay, this is what you're expected to be doing because you would be an upper class family where a parent can support you, where they're also working and they also have someone to do this and they have the technology all at the same time. And that's just not a reality.
I think that you just hit on something too that is a bigger, awesome moment. And that is that as we experience this courage to come out with our own story, whatever that is, and use your voice and say, well, actually, oh my gosh, I always make fun of my kids for saying actually, but
true. I
truly,
always say my students, they go, that was actually really good. And I'm like, thank you.
Thanks. But if we have the courage to come out and start telling these brave stories, that maybe the commonalities, those common threads that maybe people had perceptions about that were incorrect or completely wrong or completely false. I mean, you would never judge any book by its cover, right? So literally any book, any human, you can never just say, oh, well, this kid has blonde hair and blue eyes and he just got here. That doesn't mean he's not like a refugee from Turkey and only speaks Turkish and has never done any of the things that we're doing in class and doesn't even speak, does speak English. And now we got to figure out a way to help him navigate the waters here. You can't make you can't. There's more to every story. And I think the more that we feel comfortable enough to start sharing our stories, the more intersectionalities will exist, because the more connectivity will exist between and among students. Like your students, like I said, they didn't focus on the detail that made them different. They focused on what made them the same. And that was their strength in making it through. And I think that is, it makes me tear up a little bit. Like I'm getting a little bit emotional just thinking about it, because we can learn a lot from kids.
And we just don't offer them that opportunity.
Kids are brave. Kids will ask questions about if there's something different, and they're like, what do y'all eat in Portugal? Like my kids were at the park the other day playing with one of their little friends, and he started speaking another language with his little sister. And my kids, they play around with Spanish on Duolingo, whatever. And I play around with them with French. And so they've got a little bit of language exposure, but we're not a duolingual family or anything like that. So they're in the park, they hear their friends speak to the little sister, and they're like, oh, is that Spanish? And it was funny for them because the little sister was like kind of insulted. Like, of course it's not Spanish. I'm speaking Portuguese. Like, how do you not know that? And it was a big moment for them. I mean, I've told you before about how diverse our community is, and I really do love it here, that I can walk to an English Chinese church, or that my kids can go speak Portuguese with their friend out in the woods when they go play, or that you can hear literally like 8 different languages just spoken on our street. And the differences are really cool. And I really think we should tell those stories. And I think that through feeling courageous enough to share those stories, we can find what we have that's the same.
Yeah. And as we share those stories, we'll start to grow and learn together. And I hope that kind of mends the gaps that we're facing.
I hope so too.
Amber, thank you for chatting with me today. And I know this is a part 1 of part 2, and the next one definitely digs deeper into the story as we look at the story of a particularly marginalized group in the United States. So I look forward to chatting with you further, but thank you again for joining me today.
So much fun. Thanks for having me.
Don't forget to smash that thumbs up if you like what you heard today, and subscribe so you can be the first to know when new podcasts come out every week.